Our guest today on Meet the Press is Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., who led the Civil Rights March from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. Dr. King, who is the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, is president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He is in San Francisco, where he delivered a sermon this morning for Bishop Pike at the Grace Cathedral. Our panel of reporters is in Washington, D.C., and we'll have the first question now from Lawrence E. Spivak, permanent member of the Meet the Press panel.
Dr. King, former President Truman was quoted by the AP as saying that the march from Selma, and this was his word, was silly and can't accomplish a darn thing except to attract attention. Now, there have been 2 murders, many beatings, and a federal expenditure for troops of about $300,000. Would you say that what the march accomplished was worth that cost?
Well, first I would say that the march was not silly at all. I would think that the march did more to dramatize the indignities and the injustices that Negro people continue to face in the state of Alabama and many other sections of the South, more than anything else. I think it was the most powerful and dramatic civil rights protest that has ever taken place in the South, and I think it well justified the costs that we put in it. Now, of course, we're sorry that a death occurred immediately after the march, and I'm sure that all people of goodwill are outraged and in deep sorrow as a result of the death of Mrs. Liuzzo. But after all, we know in a nonviolent movement that there are these possibilities, and we go on with the faith that unmerited suffering is redemptive.
And happy Saturday, and welcome to The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. It is Saturday, January 15th, 2022, and it's also actually Martin Luther King's real birthday. Not King Day, not the holiday, not the day that you got off from work coming up on Monday, but the actual birth of Dr. Martin Luther King. In the lead into the program today, you saw a clip from March 1965, a few days before some guy named Vincent Edward Clark was born in Irwin, North Carolina. Martin Luther King was on Meet the Press the Sunday before, talking about the march from Selma to Montgomery, and it was over voting rights. And we have had a lot to say about voting rights in the last few years. And one of the things we have to say is states are trying to keep Negroes still from voting. And so I have somebody to talk to about this. I have found a real Negro, because I believe it says on his birth certificate, I'm not sure. I know I'm a Negro, Val Atkinson. Are you a Negro or are you colored?
I am colored according to my birth certificate. That's what it says. Colored.
Well, you can't talk about this then. I can, because I'm a Negro. But on a serious note, happy King Day.
Thank you. Happy King Day to you, Ed. And it's a pleasure to be here to talk about the first national holiday in the United States of America that was set aside for and talks about the greatness of an African American.
Yeah.
And that was King Day. And I'll tell you, I can go back through my working years and tell you all of the things that happened that white folks did to put up blockades and problems to keep us from celebrating King. To see where it has come now is good, but it still talks about how far we still got to go.
Well, speaking of how far we got to go, Val, I want to juxtapose the date. You know, I said that the clip that we played was in March of 1965. So some not quite 57 years ago. In my lifetime, certainly in both of our lifetimes, and in a lot of people's lifetimes. And Dr. King, in his talk there on Meet the Press, is being questioned by the reporter, where the former president was saying that, you know, the march was nonsense and so on and so forth. and that it was silly. And so King had to address that. But it would be 3 years later when King was assassinated in 68. And if you had done a man on the street, Val, and I've seen these clips from different news organizations where they went and asked people, how did they feel about King? There were a lot of nasty things said about Dr. Martin Luther King. Let's just be honest. I think there's been a lot of revisionist history, particularly with white folks, where they always play the I have a dream speech. And you notice that I haven't played that, and I will not play it today because it gets used in a way that's not true to what King talked about. Can you talk a little bit about, put your professor hat on early in the program today, and put your professor hat on and talk to me about what the opinion was on King around the time he's assassinated, and then in those years leading up to the King holiday finally being made official?
Well, initially, Dr. King was seen as a troublemaker. He was seen as a troublemaker by white officials in the South because he was upsetting the apple cart. Things were running as they wanted them to run. Blacks didn't have rights, and they weren't going to get rights. Whites in Washington were allowing whites in the Deep South to run their states as they wanted to. And you couldn't go, if you were a person of color, there was no redress for you. You couldn't go to Washington to get the people of Alabama and Mississippi to impart justice on you. And Dr. King wanted to upset that apple cart, and he wanted justice. And he knew that the place he was going to get it wasn't in Montgomery, wasn't in Jackson, Mississippi. It was going to be out of Washington, D.C., Boston, Massachusetts. It was going to be New York City, Philadelphia, Bangor, Maine, and all of those other kind of places where people were not exposed to what was really going on in the South. And this is the reason that Dr. King really embraced the whole notion of marches and rallies. And he knew that this was a way to get the television cameras there, to let people in those cities that I just named see firsthand what was really going on in the South. And he egged people like Bull Connors on and made him commit violent acts on TV so that people could see it. And I think that got lost a little bit, Ed, in terms of some of our leaders today. They really have lost their way in terms of not fully understanding why Dr. King used the tactic and the strategy he did. It wasn't that he thought that people was going to see his march and change their mind and say, oh, I didn't know that. Let's do something different. He wanted the clergy and politicians and other significantly powerful people to see what was going on a daily basis in places like Montgomery and Jackson. And that's why he did that. But now in the day of television and internet, there's no people in New Hampshire and in Vermont or Boston or wherever that doesn't know what's going on in Montgomery, Alabama, doesn't know what's going on in Jackson, Mississippi. So, the question becomes, does it have the same relevance to have a march down at the courthouse as it used to when Dr. King was doing it? But that's sort of aside to a degree. Dr. King did so many other things. Finally, he was seen as a person of value. Getting the Nobel Peace Prize didn't hurt him at all, because now the United States is being placed in a position that you're not even recognizing one of your own that's being recognized and honored by the whole world. So they had to start giving him some honors. They had to start doing things that they didn't want to do. A lot of white celebrities here in the United States, actors, people on the screen, people in politics started participating in marches with King and started writing good things about him. When Dr. King first saw an opportunity to go out against the Vietnam War, he also enlisted the support of all of those white anti-war people. They came on Dr. King's side because they saw that he was on their side. And after a while, the snowball effect went in, and you have to get out of the way because the affection for Dr. King was getting so big that something had to happen. They were going to be swept over, or Dr. King had to go. And the assassination answered that question. He had to go. But the movement itself, the movement stayed on and got even bigger. But they knew that they couldn't win this battle against Dr. King. It had gotten too big.
Yeah, you're watching or listening to The Deal. I'm Ed Clark. That's Val Atkinson, the professor, who the reason why I have Val on here, I use him and he's okay with it. I've talked to him about it. But he has an immense treasure trove of historical facts. And I do mean historical facts because, Val, one of the things that we have been seeing more and more of lately is people eschewing fact and not really want to talk about history, but want to talk about the made up history of America, of being buddies with the Indians at Thanksgiving, George Washington being not a slave owner, Thomas Jefferson not raping Black women, that whole thing that we've gone through for the whole time that we've been here. Let's wrap up the King holiday and then holidays in general. One of the other holidays that's going to be on the calendar starting this year, at least for federal employees, is Juneteenth. And what do you think about that in light of how Americans still kind of whitewash history? They'll figure out a way to have Juneteenth sales and all kind of other stuff. Talk to me real quick about your thoughts on Juneteenth being a holiday.
Well, that's one of my real sore points, Ed, because I think the whole celebration of our freedom or independence or whatever you want to call it isn't finalized yet, and it is kind of misplaced to a degree. One of my good friends and a person I look up to all the time, Judge James A. Wynn Jr., who sits on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. He's a federal judge now, and I used to work with him when he was here on North Carolina's Court of Appeals, and also a brief stint on the North Carolina Supreme Court. And one of the things he always used to say that African Americans should celebrate December the 6th as our day of independence, as our day of revolution, as our day of freedom. And December the 6th, just in case some may not know that, was the date that the 13th Amendment was ratified. Of course, it was passed by both houses of Congress on January 31st. It was first passed by the Senate in March of 1862, and then it went to the House in January of 63 when it was passed. And at that particular time, the states had to ratify it, needed 3/4 of the states to say, okay, we like this amendment to the Constitution. That didn't take place until December the 6th. That's when, in actuality, slavery officially ended in the United States of America, was on December the 6th of 1863. And I think he's got a point. The whole piece about Juneteenth, that was when some people in Galveston, Texas first heard that the Emancipation Proclamation had gone through. Now, the Emancipation Proclamation was a military exigent. First of all, let's get that straight. On September the 17th of 1862, there was a battle called Antietam, when more lives were lost than at any other battle, including Gettysburg. I used to tell some of my students, I said, get out your calculator and tell me how many people died if one died every second and a half for 11 hours. And they would shake their head and say, I don't believe somebody It died at that rate every second and a half for 11 hours. And it's the truth because it's about 23,000. But that was a significant battle, and Lincoln needed that before he could introduce the Emancipation Proclamation, or it would have looked like he was introducing it because he was losing the war. That's the advice he got from his staff, from his cabinet. Wait until you get a big victory, as he did in Antietam on September the 17th of 1862. But the Emancipation Proclamation didn't become effective until January the 1st of 1863. And it only affected those states that were still in rebellion against the United States of America, which meant that a southern state like Louisiana was not qualified to receive the benefits of the Emancipation Proclamation, nor was an area like Washington, D.C. or Delaware. These were places that didn't come under the auspices of the Emancipation Proclamation. So when people celebrated Juneteenth, that's the day when they learned about the Emancipation Proclamation that happened in January, and they got all hooked up. They were celebrating not the 13th Amendment. They were not celebrating the actual ratification of the 13th Amendment. They were celebrating Juneteenth, which had happened 6 months earlier.
Yeah.
So, we want to do this. And sometimes I wish I was still back in the classroom to teach this as a whole module and tell people you've got to know these dates, because know what you're celebrating when it comes to Juneteenth. I will celebrate Juneteenth until the day I close my eyes for the last time, because I think it's important and it's significant, but also understand your history, understand what you're really celebrating.
Yeah, absolutely, Val. I hear some music, so that means we need to take a break. When we come back, we're going to shift gears. We're going to talk about voting rights. It's a hot topic, and it has a knock-on effect from what we've been talking about, the history of King Day. Stay right there. When we come back, we'll be talking about voting rights and a whole lot more. On the way out, you're going to hear from Fannie Lou Hamer, who's another important figure in African American history. We'll be right back.
Mr. Chairman, and to the Credentials Committee, my name is Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, and I live at 626 East Lafayette Street, Rooseville, Mississippi, Sunflower County, the home of Senator James O. Eastland and Senator Stennis. If the Freedom Democratic Party is not seated now, I question America. Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off of the hook because our lives be threatened daily, because we want to live as decent human beings in America?
Everybody's got a right to live, and before this campaign fails, we'll all go down to jail. Everybody's got a right to live.
The promise that holds that we're all created equal, but more importantly, deserve to be treated equally. And from those moments of darkness and despair came light and hope. Democrats, Republicans, and Independents worked to pass the historic Civil Rights Act and the voting rights legislation. And each successive generation continued that ongoing work. But then, the violent mob of January 6, 2021, empowered and encouraged by a defeated former president, sought to win through violence what he had lost at the ballot box.
And welcome back to our second segment of the deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. We had a very interesting and enlightening discussion in the first segment. Val put on his professor hat and gave us a lesson on King Day, Juneteenth, a bunch of other things. You saw Fannie Lou Hamer on the way out of the last segment. And then now we're back to modern day, Val. Joe Biden was in Atlanta this week, and he was talking about voting rights. And Joe Biden says that the key to democracy is voting, which should be, easy for people to figure out, but not here in America. I believe Americans, especially some white Americans, Republicans in particular, which they call themselves right now, because they change their name every now and then. Sometimes they're Democrats, sometimes they're Republicans, but all the time they're fascists, Val. They believe in totalitarian government that has no representation by people who are brown and black. That I'm just going to say it. Now, it's my show, so I can say that, and I don't care there's no repercussions for me. You can be mad at me if you want to. So let's talk about Joe Biden and why he went to Atlanta, and will it make any difference at all, Val?
Not a bit. As a matter of fact, he's still counting the little crumbs that he left behind that are lost now. Somebody on his staff, Ed, convinced him that his speech was so great on his support to change the filibuster. Everybody was talking about that's the best speech he's made as a president, and it may be. But somebody convinced him that he can go in and make another speech like that, take a victory lap, if you will. And people will eat that up and say, yeah, Mr. President, we're with you. He laid an egg on that one, comparatively speaking, with his speech that he made earlier, because Stacey Abrams did not attend. So many other people that he wanted to be there didn't attend. And the people that were there, I'm not sure if all of them were buying everything he said. There's a point that the African-American community has arrived at that I'm not sure Biden is aware of. And that is, we now know the difference between words and promises and deeds and actions. We know the difference, and we know when should be applied, when should each be applied. And we're not in a mode right now that we need words, that we need to go and listen to somebody speak to get motivated to go out and register and drive people to the poll. That day is past. We can do a lot of that on our own now. We want action, especially from people that we've helped to get into positions to go ahead and make things happen through action. And Biden didn't understand that, and his speech fell flat.
Well, let me talk to you about somebody that could make an impact, who is being an asshole. And again, I can say that. It's Senator Sinema from Arizona. She would not have won had it not been for a coalition of Hispanic and Black folks in Arizona, especially young Hispanic folks who raised a lot of money for her, and then did the get out the vote and all of that, and LGBTQI folks who raised tons of money for her, got out and beat the Bushes to get her elected because she identifies as bisexual. She has turned her back completely on those folks, from my standpoint. And what it seems to me is that Senator Sinema needs to reckon with what she's done. I'm gonna play a clip, Val, and let's look at Senator Sinema and talk about that on the other side.
We are divided. It is more likely today that we look at other Americans who have different views and see the other, or even see them as enemies, instead of as fellow countrymen and women who share our core values. It's more common today to demonize someone who thinks differently than us, rather than to seek to understand their views. Our politics reflect and exacerbate these divisions, making it more and more difficult to find lasting, broadly supported solutions to safeguard our freedoms, keep our country safe, and expand opportunity for all our citizens.
Now, Val, I'm going to call bullshit on what she's talking about. We all know that the country's divided, but I just played clips of Fannie Lou Hamer and Martin Luther King from 1965. You can't get much more divided than that. Negroes were being shot down and killed. Medgar Evers had just been assassinated, right? Fannie Lou Hamer got beat to within an inch of her life because she went to register to vote. There were still unequal accommodations in interstate travel. You couldn't eat where you want to. I don't know how much more divided you can be. The other telltale for me was when Senator Sinema got up to speak. It sounded like she was about to pee her pants because she knew she was saying some bullshit when she was talking. Talk to me about how do you go from all the support from young folks in LGBTQI community and African Americans and Hispanic folks to get you elected, and you can't even be honest for 2 minutes about why you want to maintain the filibuster and not have any voting rights legislation. What is wrong with Sinema?
I can't figure it out, Ed. I don't know why people even listen to people like Sinema. There is no logic, there's no justification, there's no reasoning there. I think you'd be a candidate for the insane asylum before you would figure out what's going on in these people's mind that think like that. I don't have too much gray matter left. I've had a lot of birthdays. I'm not going to waste it on Sinema trying to figure her out and trying to figure out what's going on, because all it does is notch up the anger, the really visceral type of reaction to people like that. We already know where these people are coming from and why. And I don't want to be responsible for running somebody's blood pressure up, getting them angry by, telling them how sad and horrible people like Sinema are. They're going to do what they are going to do. I go back to something that I used to talk about when those two names came up, Sinema and Manchin, is that I don't think we can do progressives and liberals and Democrats. I don't think it's anything we can do to change their mind. You got to get to that point first. It doesn't mean we need to stop. I would have if I were in the White House, I would have somebody on my staff to call or contact in some kind of way, electronic, Sinema and Manchin's office every day for the rest of this Congress, which lasts until January the 3rd of 2023. That's when this Congress leaves and the 118th Congress comes in. I would have somebody from my office to contact them every day and say, the president is ready to talk to you about supporting a change in the filibuster rule, Senate Rule 22, anytime you are. Are you ready to meet with him? Every day, 7 days a week. And while I'm doing that, it only takes one person to do that. While we are doing that, I would be on the other side of the room working on identifying those 9 vulnerable US Senate candidates that are running for re-election to the US Senate in November of 2022, and raise money, develop strategies and tactics, get all other kind of support to do everything in our power. Now that's something you can do instead of asking somebody else to do something that you have no control over. You can't control Manchin and Sinema, okay? But you can raise money. You can help get good candidates to run and do all of those things that you can do to put the best possible candidates in the field for this November election coming up to hopefully win 4 or 5 of those 9 vulnerable seats that the Republicans are running for. If we pick up 4 or 5 seats, hold on to the seats we have now, Manchin and Sinema become irrelevant.
Right.
They become irrelevant. Now, to me, I think we got a better shot at that than trying to convince somebody that Manchin and Sinema are wrong, or they're stupid, or they are illogical, or they are unreasonable, And then what happens if you convince them people of that? What do? They're gonna go to their office and protest or vote against them. I don't think that deserves our time and attention to get some resolution about HR 1 and HR 4. You're not going to get it dealing with Manchin and Sinema. I don't believe. That's just my personal opinion here.
Right. Yeah. I want to remind you, you're watching The Deal. That's Val Atkinson. And we're trying to make sense of the world. Val, I'm going to raise your blood pressure just slightly a little bit more, and then I'll let it come down. I want to talk. The reason why this is existential to me is that there's still, we talked about it last week, the anniversary of 1/6, and people still trying to pretend like nothing happened. The head idiot who ran the whole thing,
Stewart,
are these people from the Oath Keepers and places like that. Let me play a clip real quick and then we'll talk about it.
U.S. prosecutors on Thursday charged Stewart Rhodes, the founder of the far-right Oath Keepers militia, and 10 other people with seditious conspiracy for their role in the deadly January 6th attack on the Capitol. It marked the first time prosecutors brought seditious conspiracy charges against defendants in the attack. The crime is defined as attempting, quote, to overthrow, put down, or to destroy by force the government of the United States. Prosecutors said that beginning in late December 2020, Rhodes used private encrypted communications to plan to travel to Washington on January 6, and that he and others planned to bring weapons to the area to help support the operation. Supporters of former President Donald Trump that day stormed the Capitol in a failed bid to stop Congress from certifying his election loss to President Joe Biden.
So, Val, there's been some indictments for sedition, finally. It's taken a while, but they are there. Sedition is not the easiest thing to prove, but there have been, trials on sedition in the past. I think this one, there's ample evidence for it. What do you think about finally there being some prosecutions on sedition charges with these weirdos like that?
I am glad to see the charges. I was elated to hear that there was going to be an arrest of Stewart Rhodes on this whole piece. There's going to be a lot of information that come out of this that I think the committee and the Justice Department is going to be able to use. I am not of the opinion, and I'm not going to allow myself to get disappointed again, to think that they are going to convict Stewart Rhodes of anything and he's going to serve a 20-year sentence. If he got off scot-free, that would be the last thing that would surprise me, because that's the way things go nowadays. You remember that McConnell's courts are still out there. He's got them at the district level, he's got them at the appellate level, and he's got a 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court. So the chances of Stewart Rhodes getting off somewhere along that line are not out of the question. He could do that. But what I hold out for is the information that's gathered in the process, in the whole discovery process, the presentation of information and facts and witnesses and the threats of perjury charges and all of those things, that a whole new set of informational fact will be uncovered that leads to proper resolution somewhere else down the line. That's my hope, is not so much that something will happen to Stewart Rhodes, because history has shown us that there are too many chances, too many holes in the sieve, if you will, for him to escape some kind of way. And that's why I don't think we should put all of our eggs in that one basket. This is we're not going to allow this thing to boil down or melt down to Stewart Rhodes. No, this ain't about him. There are tons of other people, including Donald Trump, that we want to look at as well. So whether or not Stewart Rhodes goes to jail, is the whole 1/6 thing is not going to rest on him. I see him as a source of additional and further information.
Well, ding, 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 ding. You hit the word of the day, Donald Trump. Anytime somebody says Donald Trump during the show, the chicken
Yeah.
falls out of the sky. I don't know. You guys are old enough, but there was a show called You Bet Your Life. Groucho Marx used to do it, and when somebody said the word of the day, the chicken would fall out of the roof.
Right.
Val said the word of the day, which also means, Val, it's time to take a break. So let's take a break. And on the way out, guess what you're going to see? You're going to see Donald Trump hang up on Steve
Oh boy.
NPR. So, and when we get back, we're going to talk about a major redistricting loss for the Republicans in Ohio and what it means for places like North Carolina. And we're going to talk about inflation, and we'll end up talking about COVID. So stay right there. We'll be right back after this message.
Let me ask about another piece of news here. South Dakota Senator Mike Rounds, as I think you know, was on ABC over the weekend. He spoke about the 2020 election and also referred to the election campaign that is now starting in 2022. Let's listen.
We simply did not win the election as Republicans for the presidency.
How come when he went to speak in different locations, nobody came to watch, but all of a sudden he got 80 million votes? Nobody believes
if you'll forgive me,
that's it.
maybe because
Nobody
the election
believes
was
it.
about you. If I can just move on to ask, are you telling Republicans in 2022 that they must press your case on the past election in order to get your endorsement? Is that an absolute?
They're going to do whatever they want to do. Whatever they have to do, they're going to do. But the ones that are smart, the ones that know, you take a look at how Carrie Lake is doing, running for governor. She's very big on this issue. She's leading by a lot. People have no idea how big this issue is, and they don't want it to happen again. It shouldn't be allowed to happen, and they don't want it to happen again. And the only way it's not going to happen again is you have to solve the problem of the presidential rigged election of 2020.
Mr. President, if I'm...
Wait,
one more question. I want to ask about a court hearing yesterday on January 6th. Judge Amit Mehta, he's gone. Okay.
Our lives have been turned upside down by COVID-19. When a vaccine becomes available, it's critical that all of us get it. What we do as individuals will impact everyone's health, including those who can't get the vaccine. We won't get through this unless everyone takes part. Now is the time to get up to date on all recommended vaccines for both kids and adults. Experts say it's more important than ever for everyone to get their flu vaccine this year. And if you're older, you should get both the flu and pneumonia vaccines, since both illnesses can make COVID-19 even worse. Vaccines are available at a lot of convenient places, so be an example for friends and loved ones and encourage them to get vaccinated too. We all want to reunite, travel, and get back to school and work. But that means we all need to get on board. This is the time to do what's right for each other. Get vaccinated. It's our best shot.
Today, the Ohio State Supreme Court ruled on that state's newly drawn congressional districts. The ruling included the phrase, "stacks the deck." Ohio's justices threw out the state's new congressional map. The ruling accuses state Republicans of gerrymandering district lines, giving themselves a built-in advantage. Now, lawmakers have 30 days to craft an acceptable map. Ohio is hardly the only state fighting over redistricting right now. Tennessee, New York, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Maryland, Nevada, just a few states working to get their districts drawn and approved.
And welcome back to our final segment of the deal. That's Val Atkinson. Val Atkinson, the Groucho Marx of Black America. He said the word of the day, and we had to play that clip. Donald Trump. We were trying not to, but we talked about it before we started the show about not trying to say Donald Trump, but unfortunately his name came up, Val. And on a serious note, you saw on the way back in Joshua Johnson from NBC talking about a loss for the Republicans in Ohio on redistricting, that the judges in the Supreme Court in Ohio say, okay, look, this is obvious what you guys are doing, but it's also obvious in Tennessee. It's also obvious in Pennsylvania. It's also obvious in Wisconsin. But we live in North Carolina, Val. It's also obvious here. Can you give me an update on where we are in North Carolina, what's happening? We know that the trial ended, last week, and we were talking about it at the end of the show. We need to get our buddy Irv Joyner on here next week to get us fully caught up. But what do you know about what's happening in North Carolina with redistricting?
Well, of course, we will defer to Irv on any of these kind of cases because he's handling that for a couple of organizations that he's a part of. But as I understand it, we're waiting at this particular point to hear what the result of the whole arguments have been as to whether or not the courts here in the great state of North Carolina are going to really allow the maps that have been drawn by Republicans through duplicity, I might add, will stand. And I think the Ohio situation, I'm hoping will have some positive effect on what happens in North Carolina. I'm not so sure that we should look toward the Supreme Court as our salvation. Because I think anything that's any decision at the state level that is not what the conservative GOP members want, they're going to ask that the Supreme Court hear the case. And the rule in the Supreme Court is that a minimum of 4 justices must agree to hear any case. And that was good when you have 5-4 margins. But they got a 6-3 margin now on the conservative side of things. So out of 6 justices, I'm sure they can find 4 to hear the case if they want to do it that way.
Yeah.
And if they do that, all bets are off, because they know that is the primer. That is where the ground level, the water level stops right there, is with voting and voting rights and gerrymandering, and the legislatures in the various states having the right to run the electoral process as they see fit. And they've spent too much time and energy taking over state legislatures for them to let it slip through their hands here. That's what this is all about. If they can take over state legislatures, then it doesn't matter that we experienced what I call the browning of America, where blacks and browns outnumber whites. It won't matter, because they'll have things fixed that whites will still run this place for a long, long time coming. And they got examples all around the world. The subcontinent of India, South Africa, many places in Southeast Asia, a lot of places where whites have been the minority in the population and have run the political culture there.
Yeah.
And run the country. That's the way it happens all over the world, where whites have gone and settled in. They've taken over, and they've been outnumbered by blacks or browns or yellows or red people or whatever color they happen to be, but whites still ran the show. And this is where we're coming from here in America now. It just finally reached that point that whites are no longer going to be the majority in the country, and they're trying to figure out, how can we still run it?
Right.
Because we don't want to live in a country where those people are running things, because we know what happened when blacks and browns are in charge. You know, you really have a bad situation, and you lose your stance of excellence. You don't have that anymore. You're a second-class country.
Or whatever, a shithole country like
shithole. That's what the 45th president called it.
45th president called. Okay, so now, so here's the problem, right? So they screw with voting as much as possible, or they try to discourage people from voting, or the notion gets out there that voting doesn't matter and you don't vote, and so a lot of people stay home. I saw a statistic this week that said that 11 million eligible Black folks didn't even decide to participate, but we had a very high participation number this last time, because Joe Biden would not have been president had it not been for those Black folks getting out. And these other 11 million could have voted that don't, for whatever reason, right? There's a lot of people, but there were obviously more white people that didn't vote either. There's 30-some million white people that could have voted, didn't vote. Which brings me to a problem that you have which is apathy. And one of the things that causes apathy is media narratives that get put out there. And what the current narrative is that inflation is terrible and somebody has to pay for it. And then I've been hearing this creeping notion that the Biden administration is in the same problem that the Carter administration was in. And I know what the dog whistle is, right? That Joe Biden has ruined the economy. I have a clip I want you to see from Nigeria, and then we'll talk about it.
Highlight of the week that was the report from the World Bank, which says Nigeria may have one of the highest inflation rates globally this year and the 7th highest among sub-Saharan African countries, with increase in prices diminishing the welfare of Nigerian households. The bank further highlighted the adverse effect of inflation on Nigeria, which include pushing 8 million Nigerians into poverty and the possible disruption of consumption, investment and saving decisions, among other consequences. The inflationary pressures also being generated by multiple demand and supply shocks arising from disruptions of supply chains linked to COVID-19 and associated containment measures.
So, Val, there is a news report from Nigeria this week talking about inflation in Nigeria. It ain't got nothing to do with Joe Biden. The Nigerian reporter is saying that it has to do, and the World Bank says it has to do with COVID and supply chain issues and the price of oil not being stable and all kind of jitters that people have because people are dying in crazy numbers and variants keep popping up. However, what you're going to see, and I've even seen it from Black folks who say, oh, I went to the grocery store and the prices are higher. Joe Biden must be the problem, or that kind of thing. How do you overcome something when I just went to Nigeria and showed you the news from Nigeria and they're saying the same thing? Joe Biden ain't the president of Nigeria. So what gives here, Val?
Well, partly because the media, it started off with the right-wing media pushing this whole thing and trying to connect inflation with a bad economy and hanging around the neck of Joe Biden. And the regular or non-right-wing media picked up on it for commercial reasons. They wanted the ratings, which gives better commercial time so they can make more money. And the media, therefore, has done more to make this an albatross and put it around the neck of Joe Biden than anything else. Because if the media hadn't pushed this thing up to numero uno, like they've done, I don't think a lot of people would be talking about it as they are. I don't think it would be that big of a thing, especially when you have the positive impact of the stimulus checks. A lot of people are making more money per hour now because certain companies have decided to try to compete. People are not going back to work after COVID, and now they got shortages. Unemployment is as low as it's been in 52 years. All of those kinds of things would make people say, yeah, bread is a little higher and gas is a little higher. I guess it'll go down a little later. Because this is not the first time that prices have gone up. It won't be the last. So I blame the media on this. And I blame people like CNN, MSNBC for following Fox's lead so you'll have something to talk about. And you can have ratings too, so you can keep making your money off advertising. They've done, I'm not putting the whole thing around on them, but I'm saying they've done their share to make this whole inflation thing the boogeyman and the albatross that it is.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I saw that clip earlier this week from Nigeria, and I was like, you know what, we need to talk about that because I'm with you, Val. I don't like the way they're covering this. Like I said, savings are at an all-time high. People are invested in the stock market, which has not taken a major hit, right? Those people are still rich as shit and getting richer. There's still IPOs going on every day. Companies are going public. People are still making money. Money is relative anyway. I mean, I wrote about around Thanksgiving, a pound of lard was 19 cents at Piggly Wiggly in 1957. So what does that got to do with a pound of lard being $5 now if you went into any store? One, people don't buy lard like they used to. There's not a demand for it, right? And then the supply is hard. People don't get any of that. I'm gonna put a pin in that right there because we need to talk about COVID, Val, before we run out of time. Let me play a clip real quick. This is Dr. Anthony Fauci and Katie Kirk.
Block President Biden's vaccine or testing mandate for large businesses. What is your reaction to that ruling?
Well, I mean, obviously, we want to get as many people vaccinated as we possibly can. It's so clear. Every time more statistics come out, it shows you the extraordinary dichotomy between people vaccinated versus unvaccinated when you're talking about hospitalizations and deaths. The difference is stunning. Certainly, and I think to clarify it, because we don't want people to think that getting vaccinated, particularly with Omicron, which is a highly, highly transmissible variant, that people who are vaccinated and boosted will get infected. There's no doubt about that. Those are breakthrough infections. But the one thing that the vaccine does do is not only protect people against infection, but not completely, but it is very good at preventing you from hospitalizations and deaths.
So Val, the Supreme Court said that you cannot have a large employer mandates, but you can have mandates in healthcare workers to be vaccinated. So a partial win for the administration. These variants, I know I've talked to probably 20 people this week who have COVID, who've had breakthroughs. A lot of them have had boosters. People in my family, people that I know, people that I work with, and I know of some people who have died who refused to get the COVID vaccine. I don't know him closely, but a friend of mine, his cousin was a Trumper who went to 1-6 as well, and went to the end, still refusing to be even treated with the drugs that they know work. Instead, he was demanding ivermectin and all that nonsense. Val, why? I mean, I know the Supreme Court says, okay, you can't do it for large employers, but you can do it in healthcare. Is that at least some sort of solace that we should take from that ruling from the court?
Well, as my conservative or middle of the road Democrats would say, something is better than nothing. And I guess that's what you got to get used to a degree. But this whole COVID piece is going to be with us for a while, I think. And I think we might as well get accustomed to dealing with it from all levels and listen to the professionals and listen to the scientists when they tell us the best way to fight and the best way to protect ourselves. And there's been a lot of conversation going on about what's best to do and what not to do and when and what age and boosters and all of these things. But I have heard nobody say, no sane person say that wearing of a mask is going to kill you, or that getting vaccinated is going to mean the death of you and your whole family. I don't hear these people saying those kinds of things. So as long as we keep that in mind, let the scientists and the professionals worry about, and the politicians worry about how many people are working in your company and what your rules are for those kinds of things. And whatever the law and the rule is, go ahead and abide by it. But first of all, make sure you're vaccinated and make sure you and everybody in your family are wearing masks. And then you let the other people do what they want about this whole piece about whether or not your co-workers are wearing a mask or not, or your fellow students and those kind of things. Because you can only handle yourself and your family. But I think there's an element out there, Ed, that just doesn't want anybody who is left of center to be telling them what to do, even if it's good for them about their health.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. One last thing on COVID, Val. This is from Australia. So like I said, so we know that this is not just America, even though people think that Anthony Fauci created COVID in a lab or some bullshit. This is from Australia.
Good evening. World #1 tennis player Novak Djokovic is back in detention tonight as he prepares for the biggest off-court battle of his career. Tomorrow, his legal team makes a last-ditch attempt to overturn his visa cancellation and stop him being deported on the eve of the Australian Open.
The world #1 enters round 2 of immigration detention.
Free the refugees!
Novak Djokovic driven into the Park Hotel, where he'll be held alongside asylum seekers.
Free the refugees!
Hours earlier, this international media scrum waited outside his lawyer's office, as inside a plan was made to fight deportation in the federal court.
So that's a Serbian, Novak Djokovic, who's the #1 tennis player in the world on the men's side, who has exposed other people to COVID because he had COVID, knew it, and still went to media events. Then he got on the damn plane, Val, flew to Australia, lied on his visa, and wants to play on Monday in the opening of the Australian Open. I'm not going to say a whole bunch more about it because we've talked about Kyrie Irving, we've talked about Aaron Rodgers, we talked about other quasi-celebrities who, Cardi B, who talked about, you know, your ball shrinking or some bullshit a few months ago. All that to say is that if you haven't been vaccinated, damn it, go get vaccinated. I can't stress that enough. If you haven't been boosted and you can be boosted, get boosted, because guess what? Israel started their fourth shot this week. They are boosting their boosters in Israel, and they have seen a dramatic difference by staying on top of this compared to the United States, Val. So that's the last word on COVID, but it is not the last word because you get the last word. I need to know what's coming up in the coming week, something we got to look forward to, something you want to tell us.
Well, as usual, we have a show called Connections that airs on Fox 107, 104 every other week. And it will not be on tomorrow, but it'll be on a week from tomorrow. And we have some wonderful things to talk about leading into the new year to give you a peek preview as to what you can look forward to on Connections in the coming year. There are going to be some surprises. So I would encourage people to tune that in and listen to see where we're going in 2022.
Well, there you go. You got the last word. Folks, guess what? It is going to be snowpocalypse for a lot of people this weekend, depending on where you live. I've already talked to some people out in the Midwest who are getting socked right now. In North Carolina, you may or may not get anything. More than likely, you'll get ice, which is much worse. So make sure that you can tolerate not having power if it comes to that for a while. So what I want you to do is go out, do something good for somebody today, and come back here next Saturday. Start inviting other people to come in, because we do this. We don't make a lot of money, which is like $0 that we make from doing this. But we do it because we want to educate people. And so we'll see you next Saturday. You've been watching The Deal. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Our guest today on Meet the Press is Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., who led the Civil Rights March from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. Dr. King, who is the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, is president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference.